Hello everyone. My name is Dr. Kearrin Sims and I'm a lecturer in Development Studies at James Cook University in beautiful Far North Queensland. I'd like to begin by saying thank you to Sydney Southeast Asia Centre for the opportunity to briefly discuss the current political landscape in Laos with you today. I'm really pleased to see Laos feature in the Politics in Action program, as while research on the country has grown significantly over recent years, in many ways it's still underrepresented in Southeast Asian studies. My own research in Laos is focused primarily on issues of development and social justice, as well as transnational connectivity, and particularly China's growing presence in the country. In addition to my research, I'm also the International Relations Review Editor for the journal Asian Studies Review. I'm on the Executive Committee for the Development Studies Association of Australia, and I am Treasurer of the Association of Mainland Southeast Asia Scholars. So if you're not already a member of the DSAA or ANSES, or if you are not familiar with the Asian Studies Review Journal, you can use the links that I've included on the PowerPoint to find out more. The last 12 months have been relatively quiet in terms of political movement in Laos, and yet I still feel like there is much to cover in the short amount of time that I have today. Political systems cannot be separated from the social, cultural and economic contexts in which they sit. And while Laos' political landscape has been relatively stable, other sectors in the country are extremely dynamic. As such, what I would like to do today is to summarise some of the key nationally significant forces that are shaping Laos society, all of which are deeply political issues. Beginning with political process, the next Party National Congress of the ruling Lao People's Revolutionary Party is scheduled for early next year. Through this process, new leaders and a new Politburo will be elected, but it is extremely difficult to predict what specific changes this will bring to leadership positions. I've been told that new, relatively young and well-educated figures are being drafted into senior party positions, but the usual nepotism, cronyism and patronage also continues to inform party processes. There was also chatter pre-COVID-19 that the date of the Party National Congress might change, but nothing has been confirmed. Under normal circumstances, the Congress takes place around March every 5 years. Regarding changes in leadership priorities and direction, the current Prime Minister, Thongloun Sisoulith, was appointed at the last Party Congress in 2016. In the early years of his leadership, there was considerable hope and optimism that Thongloun was starting to drive important political reforms. He began an anti-corruption campaign that was similar to those undertaken in China and Vietnam. He closed down socially and environmentally harmful plantations and factories, and he implemented valuable economic reforms. This drive towards change has, however, slowed quite significantly over the last 2 years, and public support for Thongloun has been damaged by, amongst other things, a very disappointing response to the collapse of a hydropower dam in southern Laos, which is something that I'll discuss further shortly. For this reason, the respected journalist David Hart has argued that any reform agenda in Laos has now disappeared. I remain hopeful that following the next Party Congress, a round of further reforms will prove David partially wrong, but hopeful is the key word here. There is indeed little cause for optimism, and in fact there's much to be concerned about. In terms of human rights and political freedoms, anyone that is familiar with Lao politics will know that restraints on political freedom, corruption, lack of transparency, and human rights abuses have been a mainstay more or less since the party gained leadership control in 1975. Before discussing these issues, I'd like to begin with a caveat that corruption, suppression of political voice, and human rights abuses are by no means Laos' sole property, or for that matter, the sole property of Southeast Asia. Anyone that closely follows Australian or US politics, for example, will know that we're also seeing significant democratic rollback in these countries. That being said, political oppression and human rights abuses are really serious issues in Laos that cannot be ignored. Lao PDR is a single-party state governed by an authoritarian regime that has ruled for more than 40 years without political opposition. According to Freedom House, it is one of the most politically repressive societies in the world, ranked 14 out of 100 categorised countries, a score which makes it the lowest ranked country in Southeast Asia. On Transparency International's Corruption Perception Index, it ranks 132 of 180 countries, while the media monitoring organisation Reporters Without Borders lists it as the 171st worst country worldwide for freedom of the press. In September last year, for example, a resident of Champasak province, Ms. Hui Huang Sayabuli, was arrested on charges of defaming the country for criticising the government's response to flooding in a Facebook Live video. This arrest is only one of a number of arrests that have occurred over recent years in relation to social media posts, and which is supported with new legislation that, amongst other things, prevents the use of online pseudonyms. Ms. Hui Huang's arrest came just 1 month after the believed enforced disappearance of the prominent Lao human rights activist Od Sayavong, who was last seen at his Bangkok home on August 26. Od is affiliated with the Free Lao Group, a network of Lao migrants based in Thailand who, amongst other activities, have held peaceful protests outside the Lao Embassy and the United Nations headquarters in Bangkok. Od Sayavong remains missing, and his disappearance also follows the December 2018 disappearance of 3 Thai political activists in Vientiane. 2 of these activists were found in the Mekong River in January 2019 with bound hands and feet, and their disemboweled bodies were stuffed with concrete. The possibility of state collusion in the enforced disappearances of political activists is a deeply concerning development for mainland Southeast Asia. Relatedly, in March 2019, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights, Professor Philip Alston, visited Laos and stated that a single-minded focus on preserving power and controlling public discussion has precluded important conversations and robbed Lao people of a meaningful say in the solutions to widespread social problems. He continued, a near total lack of space for freedom of expression, strict limitations on media and civil society, and a history of reprisals, arrests and disappearances have shut down space for the exchange of ideas and solutions and prevented people from raising grievances and seeking accountability. Little to no progress has been made on any of these challenges over the past 12 months. Finally, in January this year, the United Nations Human Rights Council conducted a universal periodic review of Laos, which resulted in 226 recommendations for the government to carry forward. The effects of this political oppression and opacity are not limited to human rights issues, they're also felt within business. So for several years now, Laos' ranking in the World Bank's Ease of Doing Business report has been slipping. It's declined from 134th place back in 2013 to its current ranking of 154th. It is a constant priority of the government to improve this ranking, and indeed the aspiration is to rank within the top 100 countries, but without deep structural reform to the party system, this aspiration will continue to be frustrated. Regarding international relations, the leading story for Laos over at least the past 5 years or so has been one of growing Chinese influence. This has continued over the past 12 months, with China investing heavily in road, railway and hydropower projects, as well as agribusiness and construction. It has long been reported and debated that there are different factions within the Lao People's Revolutionary Party which respectively favour China and Vietnam. Putting aside the debates regarding the kind of groupness of these factions, it's certainly true that China and Vietnam's level of influence varies across Lao provinces, and that individual members of the party have closer relationships with political and private sector actors from either China or Vietnam. Generally speaking, and reflecting the geography of the region, China's influence is strongest in the north and Vietnamese influence is strongest in the south. Chinese and Vietnamese efforts to tussle for influence in Laos have continued over the last 12 months, and both Thailand and Japan also remain significant diplomatic and economic partners of the Laos government. All of this external aid, trade and investment has bolstered the authority of the government, which, while becoming increasingly indebted to China, has successfully leveraged foreign flows to expand its governance capacities, fund image-enhancing projects, and to enrich and entrench single-party rule. Also worth mentioning in terms of recent international political exchanges is the August 2019 tensions between Laos and Cambodia along their shared national border. While this dispute was quickly diffused and does not appear to have had any significant lingering effect on relations between the two states, it does highlight the ongoing fragility of relationships within ASEAN and the continued possibility of conflict within the region. So turning now to some of the big sectoral and thematic issues that shape and are shaped by Laos politics, I'll begin with transnational connectivity. As a landlocked country, promoting transnational connectivity has long been a priority in Laos that is seen by the government and its partners as crucial to national development. Over the past year, transnational connectivity projects have continued to be rolled out, the most contentious of which is the Pan-Asia Railway project. By far the most grandiose current infrastructure connectivity project in Laos, the Kunming to Singapore Pan-Asia Railway is a flagship project of China's Belt and Road Initiative and the backbone of the BRI's overland route through Southeast Asia. Like many other transnational infrastructure corridors in the region, the railway project is perceived as a crucial mechanism for stimulating social and economic development for increased trade and investment opportunities. Expected to be completed sometime in 2021, but likely to be delayed by COVID-19, the Laos section of the Pan-Asia Railway has an estimated cost of US $6 billion, although estimates do vary considerably, and will run from the China-Laos border in Luang Nantha province to the Thai-Laos border in Vientiane province. Construction is being undertaken by the Laos-China Railway Company, a joint venture in which China owns a 70% stake and Laos owns a 30% stake. And under current arrangements, the Laos government has committed $250 million from budget expenditures, as well as borrowing an additional US $465 million from the China Export-Import Bank. Few projects are as politically sensitive as the railway. Alongside the growth opportunities that it will bring, it's widely anticipated that the project will produce new forms of poverty and disadvantage, as well as significant environmental degradation. More than 3,800 hectares, or 9,500 acres, of land have been reserved for this mega project, which is expected to forcibly displace more than 4,400 families. And reports have already emerged of insufficient compensation payments and various forms of hardship induced by resettlement and displacement. Such displacements and associated hardships continued throughout the last 12 months. And many have also argued that the railway will place an unsustainable debt burden on Laos to China, and given that the project cost is more than a third of Laos' GDP, this does indeed seem likely. Another highly contentious feature of Laos' regional connectivity and its development aspirations is the hydropower sector. Seeking to become the battery of Southeast Asia, Laos has ambitious plans to build hundreds of hydropower dams, the bulk of which will generate electricity to be exported to neighbouring Thailand and Vietnam. Politically, the most contentious dams have been those built or proposed to be built on the Mekong mainstream river. So I can't even get close to begin summarising all the debates around hydropower in Laos today. But three key significant projects over the past year have been the early phase commencement of a Mekong mainstream dam north of Luang Prabang, and that project's funded by Thai, Lao and Vietnamese investors. And then the commencement of operations of two dams on the lower Mekong. That's the Sayaburi and the Don Sahong dams. The July 2018 collapse of the Saddle D Dam in Atapu province, which resulted in at least 40 immediate deaths and more than 6,000 displaced peoples, also remains a critically important issue. In March 2019, when the aforementioned United Nations Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights visited the surrounding region, he found 3,750 people remaining in limbo, living in crowded and hot temporary accommodation without information about what the future holds and with extremely limited financial support. Expectedly, information regarding the ongoing circumstances of those affected by the dam collapse is suppressed, but reports from close contacts, as well as from Radio Free Asia, indicate that many people are still experiencing severe hardship. Hydropower remains a contentious transnational issue within mainland Southeast Asia, and effective mechanisms to resolve bilateral and multilateral disputes are still significantly lacking. Another highly politicised and important issue in Laos over the past 12 months has been ongoing contestation regarding land access, usage and rights. One of the Government of Laos' core strategies for economic growth and development is the promotion of foreign investment, turning land into capital, and the allocation of large concessions to drive such investment. Through road projects, mining, hydropower, agribusiness, forestry and logging, urbanisation, connectivity projects and the rolling out of special economic zones, tensions over land have been widespread across the country. Such tensions have become a key talking point on social media, and in March this year, 2 residents protesting state acquisition of land in Vientiane were arrested after a video of their confrontation with police was posted on Facebook. According to an article in the state-run Vientiane Times from November last year, a report on inspections into land rental and concessions granted to developers was approved by the government's National Assembly and found that approximately 11.7 million hectares of land had been granted by government to foreign investors, but that the actual amount of land being used was close to 550 million hectares. This finding would not have surprised anyone who studied land issues in Laos, since as far back as 2007, the Lao government has implemented moratoriums on certain type of land concessions and made other attempts to improve regulation, revenue collection and conflict mediation around land issues. So while there is a history of failure in government attempts to halt or improve land concessions, the November report demonstrates that the government nonetheless recognises the serious nature of land conflicts and continues to seek more effective policies. Land allocations and displacements are not slowing down, and land ownership, access and usage remain important political challenges for the future. Interrelated with land issues and connectivity is the associated challenges of conservation and forestry loss. Perhaps the saddest story here for the last year was research findings that indicate that wild tigers are highly likely to now be extinct in Laos. There are still many tiger farms across the country, and politically, international conservation groups have repeatedly condemned the Lao government for its weak policing of tiger farming and other illegal wildlife trading. This includes the caging of numerous tigers at the Golden Triangle Special Economic Zone, in which the government of Laos maintains a 20% ownership stake. As I've written about, new infrastructure projects such as the high-speed railway also continue to pose ongoing threats to wildlife and natural environments, including the country's elephant population, which has declined by almost 90% over the past 30 years to an estimated 400 wild elephants. Without active government intervention, current trends will lead to an extinction of elephants in Laos by 2030. Conservation does not sit high on the political agenda, and continued international pressure is thus needed to try and prevent further biodiversity loss. And in our current circumstances of global pandemic, it seems necessary to finish today with a brief comment on Laos and COVID-19. According to the Johns Hopkins University Coronavirus Resource Centre, Laos has just 19 confirmed cases of COVID-19. Such statistics should, of course, be taken with a grain of salt, due to both limited testing and limited reporting. That being said, given that Laos shares a border with China, as well as with Thailand, Vietnam and Cambodia, that it has not yet experienced a severe outbreak of COVID-19 is something to be thankful for. Reports from inside Laos suggest that the government has performed well in its management of the virus, including the closure of international and provincial borders. COVID-19 is going to present enormous challenges for countries across Southeast Asia, Laos included, and it remains to be seen how the spread of the pandemic will affect connectivity and development efforts in ASEAN over the long term. It is certain that international aid will need to be increased to lessen the myriad effects of COVID-19, and as a least developed country, Laos will likely require increased development assistance, even if it continues to successfully control its number of cases. Current projections for 2020 suggest a reduced economic growth rate for Laos of just 3.3%, which will be the lowest rate in 35 years. Given that pangolin are believed to be a possible origin for COVID-19, the global pandemic also raises the significance of the aforementioned illegal wildlife trade in Laos, which is primarily directed towards Chinese consumers and which includes the sale of pangolin. So I'm in no way suggesting that the virus may have originated in Laos, but what I am suggesting is that if the international community is committed to working harder at controlling the sale and consumption of protected species, Laos will be a country of key importance. Finally, COVID-19 brings new concerns regarding political oppression and human rights in Laos. As the Executive Director of Focus on the Global South, Shamli Duttal recently argued, many governments across Asia have taken advantage of the pandemic to consolidate political power, cement authoritarian rule, and erode human rights. In Cambodia, for example, new state of emergency legislation contains sweeping provisions allowing the government to carry out unlimited surveillance of telecommunications, to control the press and social media, and to imprison anyone found guilty of disobeying vaguely worded emergency measures for up to 10 years. We are yet to see such legislation emerge in Laos, but the risk that COVID-19 will be used to increase authoritarianism remains high. Journalist David Hutt has claimed that the Lao People's Revolutionary Party has been experiencing gradual regime decay since the day it came to power in 1975. I myself am not so optimistic. Back in 2012, there was much excitement in Laos that the country was headed for change, greater political freedoms, and an opening up to the world. With the enforced disappearance of Sombat Sompong and the expulsion of Anne-Sophie Gindros, that excitement was crushed. From 2012 onwards, civil society in Laos has retreated to apolitical work, and the new legislation, including the aforementioned social media laws, have seen state controls advance into new domains. Commentators around the world are currently speculating on whether COVID-19 will see a change to business as usual. There is widespread hope for the emergence of a more inclusive and progressive politics and more equitable and sustainable economies. If such changes do come, and I'm a bit sceptical that they will, I await to see if and how they will materialise in Laos. Thank you very much.